fan of making your own clothes, chances are you might also be into growing some of your own food. And like this week's guest, garden consultant Pippa Chapman highlights, once you start trying to be more sustainable in one area of your life, that approach usually spreads to the others. In this episode, Pippa actually takes the reins and gives me a consultation about my own little garden. She offers up advice on how I can use my space more productively and successfully, which might be applicable to you too. And if you really aren't interested in gardening or growing food, skip to the latter part of this conversation where we talk about sewing. Pippa explains her considered approach to clothing herself and her family and the exciting new community sewing project that she's setting up. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 15 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Thank you for joining me this week, lovely listener. How are you doing? Very well, I hope. Are you sewing anything at the moment? Or have you been mending or repairing anything? On my sewing table is the blouse pattern that I'm currently testing and lots of little items that I'm making to sell at a little community craft fair that I'm organising. If you happen to be anywhere near Portslade in Sussex on the 25th of November, and I know that that's a long shot, but if you are, please come down to the South Portslade Community Centre between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. So far for the fair, I've made a ton of hair scrunchies, so there's some very affordable stocking fill options, plus some wash bags I've made from laminated fabric, and some neck warmers from sweatshirt fabric in both adults and kids sizes. I plan to make some more pouches, and then I'll see what else I've got time for. What has been cool is that I've not had to buy anything at all to make these things. It's all been from fabric and haberdashery already in my stash. And after the fair, when I inevitably have a bunch of unsold items, I'll have things that I can give to my friends and family for Christmas presents, and then have a little stash of items to give when a birthday comes up throughout the rest of the year. Okay, so I've had a multi-layered sustainability win and fail situation over the last week or so that I need to tell you about. Although the situation itself was kind of out of my control, so perhaps it's more of a sustainability win and frustration situation. Anyway, so we recently had some shocking news in that we learnt that my kids' school is most likely going to close down at the end of the academic year. It's part of a larger proposal of plans to address the fact that basically there's way more school places across the city than kids to fill them. Anyway, as you can imagine, for the school and the families, it has been like a really sad and confusing and stressful time. But the upshot of it is that for us, we have decided to move our kids to another fairly local school, and they start there this week. So beyond the wider sustainability implications of closing down an entire school, as the sustainability of it pertains to me, is in relation to school uniform. So as I've mentioned before, I always try to get all my kids' uniform items secondhand for sustainability reasons. And what is annoying is that I literally had all the items that I was going to need for my son for the next 3 years at that old school, and all the items that my daughter was going to need until she finished her primary education. However, the new school they're going to has a uniform of completely different colours. So I've been tasked with sourcing the new uniform and passing on the old collected uniform in the most conscious ways that I can. So good news is I've been able to get hold of most of the new stuff that they need secondhand. So thankfully, I was quick to find out that the new school has a well-organised second-hand school uniform cupboard, and parents and carers can help themselves and then leave a donation. And the stuff that I couldn't get in the cupboard, I've been hitting up the Vinted app. I have had to buy 2 new polo shirts for each of them, and I had to get that from a supermarket, which, as you know, I hate. And I'm going to have to get them each a PE t-shirt from the school office because they have like specific colours relating to what house they're in. So that's not completely perfect, but pretty good. And as for getting rid of the old school uniform, I've found friends with kids at other schools or who are about to go to a new school that wear the same generic school uniform as my kids' old school did. So most of it I can pass on and it will see another life. However, I have all these specific school jumpers and cardigans that have the badge of the old school. And for obvious reasons, there is no longer a market for those anymore. I'm thinking of cutting them up and making my kids some joggers from them. Although that kind of feels really sad and a bit weird because obviously we didn't really want them to leave. Anyway, I have a lot of them because I was also hoarding the old ratty ones that they previously grew out of as well. So if anyone has any ideas of what to do with them, please let me know. Phew, that felt quite intense. But something that is very lovely is that I get to thank new patron Joanna for signing up to support the podcast via Patreon this week. And I get to thank existing patron Teresa for upping the amount of her support. Massive thanks to you both. I really appreciate the vote of confidence in what I'm doing with this podcast. If you don't think that you'd miss the price of a cup of coffee each month and would like to help keep this podcast going, please find the Patreon link in the show notes or on the website checkyourthread.com. So on to today's podcast. I'm really excited to be keeping you on your toes and bringing you something a bit different this week. I absolutely loved handing over the reins to Pippa for a large part of this conversation and being interviewed by her. She shared a lot of really interesting ideas and information, and every single thing that she mentioned has been carefully noted in the show notes, including images of the slug and snail trap and the double pallet planters she talks about. So don't worry about taking notes. Check out the show notes on the website checkyourthread.com instead. And whilst you're there on that website, make sure you sign up to the free weekly Check Your Thread newsletter at the bottom of the homepage if you haven't already. Before we play the conversation, I want to give you a quick update about the amazing community sewing project that Pippa mentions towards the end. At the time of recording, they were about to set it up, but spoiler alert, I can now tell you that it's up and running and going really well. They are looking for donations, however, of machinery, mannequins, fabric, wool and haberdashery to keep it going. So if you are anywhere near Keighley in Yorkshire and have some of those items to spare, please get in touch with Pippa. And if you're into this episode and growing food is your jam, why not line up episode 102, which is Sustainability in Food Production, with Helen Metcalf after this one. Apologies for the extra long intro this week. Until next week, take care and enjoy. Thank you for doing this. How are you doing?
Good, yes, recovering.
All right, well, let's go into it. Can you tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
Yes, my name's Pippa Chapman. I'm from Keighley in West Yorkshire, and what fills my days? Mostly gardening.
For other people? For yourself?
Gardening for other people, and then in weekends gardening for myself as well. So lots of gardening, and when I'm not doing that, I'm doing things with the kids. So I like walking, cycling. So mostly outdoors.
Yeah, very outdoors.
When I eventually get time to myself, I like to do sewing. So that's, how.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into sewing a little bit towards the end of this conversation. But I'm very excited to be handing over the controls to you for a good chunk of this conversation, which is not something I'm used to. So I'm really looking forward to this. So what have you got in store for me?
So I know that having listened to your podcast, I know how much you talk about food growing. And I think it is so true that I think once you start to do one thing in your life that is all about sustainability, it sort of starts to move into all the other areas of your life. So for me, it was very much about doing sustainable gardening, and then I became interested in reducing plastic use and then sustainability in my sewing as well. So I've sort of come at it from the other angle. So I think, listening to what you were saying, I was thinking, I could help with that. Part of my job, I do all sorts of different, I do some garden maintenance, some garden design, but one thing that I really enjoy doing is garden consultation. So I'll go to people's gardens, they'll throw a million questions at me, and then I will, give them some answers and ideas of what they can do and how they can sort of build sustainability in, but also, identify certain things and decide what else they can do in the garden to be sustainable and grow things well. So
Amazing. So how did you get into gardening?
Well, I actually trained in fine art. So I did a degree in sculpture and I thought, that's it, I'm going to be an artist. That's what I wanted to do. But I very quickly didn't enjoy sitting inside, trying to be inspired. And I think being at university and having the freedom to create whatever you want, you're not having to worry about selling it or anything, you know, that was loads of fun. But then you go out into the real world and you find very quickly that it's very different, and sort of you need to make more commercial artwork, and I wasn't really enjoying that at all. So I actually went to help out at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park to help with some kids outdoor making sculptures with found objects in the landscape, which was loads of fun. But actually I found that I was really a lot more interested in sort of being outside than I was in that artwork. And I had a bit of a tour of the gardens there, which are absolutely amazing. And I just thought, wow, I'm actually really interested in the gardening side. I've always done a bit of gardening, but I'd never really thought of it as a career option. It's not something anyone ever tells you at school is a career option.
Completely.
I don't know why, you know, horticulture isn't on the curriculum really.
Which is ridiculous considering like how many people in the UK have got a garden. You know, like of course that's you've got a home. There's decorators, there's electricians, there's plumbers.
Yeah.
Like, what about the outside space? That's almost as big a footprint as your home, often, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So then I changed and I moved into horticulture. I still get to use my creativity and. You know, when I do planting plans, it's very much about 3 dimensions, and it's actually even more complicated than just doing sculpture, because you've got to think about, you know, how far do the plants spread, or getting interest and colour through the season. So you're trying to think not just in 3D but in time as well. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And even before that, actually, before I went into sculpture, I was really interested in costume design as well. So I've always had that interest in sewing as well since being really young. So yeah, both those things have kind of continued through life.
Lovely. And they're both parts of your life now. Right. Okay, let's do it.
Right. You ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this like for weeks.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you for sending me your video. That was really helpful.
I hope that was okay.
Yes, no, it was great. It was, you know, just a nice overview of what your space is and what you're growing there.
It's really small.
Yeah, it is small, but I think, you know, small is sometimes it gives you challenges that make you be a bit more creative, I think, as well.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes people have acres of space, but actually most of that is just filled with a massive lawn. So, you know, I think.
Yeah. And I think that when I went to the Netherlands at Easter, I was blown away by how much people were able to do on the smallest little space, like outside their front door or just some old steps or something, you know. And I found it so inspiring. And I just came back and I was like, right, I've actually got a lot of potential here. It's not a big space, and I was a bit before like, oh man, I've got such a small garden. But yeah, it really made me realise that actually you can do a lot, and that's really kind of lit a fire under me. Like,
absolutely. And there's people like the cloud gardener. I don't know if you've heard of the cloud gardener.
No.
But he actually gardens on balconies. So he has his own balcony where he grows, you know, he even has like a little pond, and he grows some food crops. And now he's designing other people's balconies as well. So even in like a really small space of a balcony, you can still grow loads. So compared to that, you've got acres of space.
No, absolutely. And this is the thing as well, like until we moved to this house a couple of years ago, I didn't have any outside space at all. Like at one point I had an allotment, but all our previous homes for many, many years didn't have literally even a stoop. So I'm very lucky. I am super lucky now. So how do I make the most of it?
Great. So I want to start with sort of what are your aims and your goals? And I know you talked a little bit about that in the video, but it's always good to sort of tease that out and find out what you're wanting to do.
Sure. So my goal is I would like to have something that my family can eat growing for as much of the year as possible, whether that's some raspberries, whether that's some kale, whether that's, I don't know, some tomatoes. As obviously like full seasonality throughout the year is challenging, but I would like, I think what it was when I think I mentioned this in my conversation with the crap activist during lockdown, when there was that first bit where all the food deliveries, they're all messed up, and went into Sainsbury's and there was nothing in the fresh fruit and vegetable. And that really was, I'm not doing it from like a prepper standpoint, but it was a real shock, and it made me think about food security, and then also the whole packaging thing as well, obviously, trying to, it's so hard to get like a nice range of fruit and veg for your family without getting some plastic packaging. And I'd like to reduce that as much as possible as well. So it's linked to plastic, it's linked to food security, and just the challenge of it. Like, it's a fun challenge as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that's a brilliant aim, really. You're not trying to say, oh, in my small garden, I want to be fully self-sufficient all year long.
No, but I keep talking about chickens to my husband. He's like, shut up.
Yeah. But I think, just to be able to have something out there all year long. And it's great as well, particularly if you have children, it's great for them to learn where food comes from. It doesn't come from the supermarket in plastic bags, someone somewhere is growing it, and then unfortunately it gets put in a plastic bag and put on the supermarket
and then it gets in the plastic bag,
yeah.
And I'd also like to be as friendly to the pollinators as I can as well. That's another kind of adjacent goal.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. The idea here is we go through lots of questions and then afterwards I sort of give advice, and things like that. But so what's your level of knowledge and your experience? You mentioned you had an allotment once.
I had an allotment for a couple of years in Eastbourne. That was quite a learning curve.
Right.
Yeah, so some trial and error. Reading some blogs, reading some books. I've got quite a few books, going on Instagram and stuff. Yeah, just kind of like thinking about what my family likes to eat.
Yeah, that's a great
And then
start.
trying to work out how to grow that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's amazing actually how many people sort of start out and think, oh yes, the book says I have to grow, radish and courgette, and actually I don't really like radish or courgette, but they still put it in the garden. So yeah, I think just even working out what your family likes to eat is a really good step.
Absolutely. I didn't do courgette this year for two reasons. One, because I was like trying to push courgette onto everybody that I know.
Yeah.
I was like, no more courgette. And two, the plants they can be really big, can't they? And they took up a lot of space. So I just thought, what, this year I'm not going to. But I do kind of miss it because I think they're beautiful plants as well.
Yeah.
And they do, the fruit is so impactful.
And they are quite, you can get a really steady supply off them for a long period of time. So
absolutely. It was very satisfying.
You could look at it two ways in that actually, usually you can find someone who's giving courgettes away. So you don't necessarily need to grow them in your own garden if you have a small space. But also you can actually train courgettes to sort of go upwards.
Right.
So if you have, I know you've got quite a lot of fence in your garden, so you could, if you really decided you'd like to try them again, you can actually sort of train their foliage and fruits to sort of grow more vertically. So
that's exciting.
Gives you a little bit more space.
Yeah. Up what?
You put some rope or cane or something like that, and then you can just sort of tie the plant onto it as well. So it doesn't sort of grow really long like a pumpkin or something would, but you can sort of try to train it to take up a little bit less space. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to try that with butternut squash as well, because I've had success growing those, but they just want to take over the world, don't they?
Yeah, well,
they just like encroach over everything.
We in our last house we had a yard, and there really wasn't very much room to grow. If I'd have planted a couple of pumpkins, there wouldn't have been room for anything else. So we started to train them upwards, and actually we just trained them up and along washing lines. And we actually use them as a canopy, so they will grow a really long way, and they'll grow up a wall and over like a pergola type structure.
Oh, now I want one of those.
Yeah, and the pumpkins will actually support themselves, so you don't even have to...
Which is astonishing because they're heavy,
They're really
aren't they?
heavy. I have grown a pumpkin like twice the size of my head, and it just self-supported itself off the line, yeah.
Okay, that's exciting.
So, yeah, I would look at growing pumpkins vertically. And what's nice as well, actually, because I'm quite a shade lover. I don't like sitting in the sun. So I quite like the fact that in the winter, I can sit outside in the sun then. But then in the summer, the pumpkins actually create a bit of a canopy. So they create a bit of shade for me to sit under as well.
I could do with a bit of shade actually, because it is a bit of a sun trap, my garden. Because our house is a terrace, but it's the end of terrace.
Okay.
So it gets quite a lot of, and there's a car park next to it, so there's nothing kind of overgrown. So so it would be nice actually to introduce some shade like that, and especially if it could be useful shade, like it's growing food as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can, I mean, my favourite varieties are things like Crown Prince, because they're just like they're not too big a pumpkin. They're not orange, they're actually a kind of greeny blue colour, so they're not like your traditional pumpkin.
I think I've seen those. Yeah.
And they're just a nice size, because quite often, people want to grow these giant pumpkins, but when you then try and eat them, quite often they're quite bland in flavour.
Yeah.
And they're so big that you think, what am I going to do with all of this massive amount of pumpkin,
Yeah, and because it doesn't taste that good, like it's hard to convince people.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas you take something like Crown Prince, and it's much more like, got more flavour like a butternut squash does.
Right, okay, cool.
And it's just a nice size. So you've got enough to like maybe roast some with Sunday dinner and then use the leftovers to make soup or something like that. So it's like they're a nice size as well.
Lovely. Okay, cool.
Yeah, great. So where are we? And how much time do you have for your garden generally? I know you must be quite busy doing your sewing and with your family.
Busy, but I'm lucky that most of the week I'm working from home.
Okay.
So I can pop out and do stuff, as like a little break. And I could probably be a bit more, instead of like scrolling on Instagram when I need a break,
Yeah.
I could go and be a bit more productive in the garden. So I could probably give more, and I would like to convince the kids a bit more that it's a legitimate.
Yes.
I think they grew up in a flat with no outside space.
Yeah.
And when we moved here, they're like, great, they'll be out there all the time. No,
Yeah.
I think it's just not been part of their lives as they were tiny. They're just like...
Well, you say that, but my kids are, similar to that, and they grew up in like this amazing place with loads of stuff growing, surrounded by two parents who grow stuff for a living. And I think they just get to an age where they're just like, no, I'd rather sit here and read a book. So...
Yeah. I don't know, mate. My daughter, I found on the street somebody was getting rid of like a chest of drawers, that it was all damaged. And I took one of the drawers home and I drilled some holes in it and put some soil in it. And that's like her flower garden. So she's kind of got a little bit of an incentive and a bit of investment in that. And she's grown to an amazing lavender from seed.
And I think I think it works well as well for kids to give them their own little space. I know that when my mum... when I was probably about 8 or 9, she gave me one little corner of the garden. That was my corner. And I have to admit that mostly I grew sort of nettles and things in it. I'm not sure that I tended it very well.
That was your choice.
But I loved going out and playing in it. But so I think to give them a little bit of their own space and their own ownership, then that gives them a little bit more interest than you just telling them what to do all the time. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And in terms of budget, so you don't need to say like a specific amount, but is it kind of like I suppose in sustainable gardening, then ideally your budget could be zero, because the idea is most of the things that you get will be found things.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love the look of that, and I love the challenge of that. So I'm on Free Cycle, I'm on Olio, I'm on Trash Nothing. I'm always looking out on the street.
Right.
There's an amazing seed swap in Brighton.
Oh,
yes, I'm talking about the seed swap.
I've heard about it. Yeah, I definitely. I'm going to try and get there next year. I know it's a very long way away, but
come down. I
went to university in Brighton, and
it
was funny because when I was there, I never knew any of the stuff that was going on. Like I didn't know there was, permaculture projects nearby, or I didn't know about any of that. So it'd be nice to.
I'm only just dipping my toe in, really, but the seed swap. I'm in.
Yeah.
Please come down. It's really good.
Yeah, great.
So I have been saving lots of seeds as currency for when I go to the seed swap.
Right.
So I'd like to keep the budget as little as possible. We don't have a lot of spare income. And also I like the challenge of seeing what can be done for very little, both for that challenge and also to kind of as an example for other people as well, like an example to my kids as well, like what can we do with what already exists,
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's the best way. I mean, I'm from Yorkshire and we're well known for being, not wanting to spend any money. So yeah, that's my default setting is spending no money. So you're all right there. So I suppose before we get on to sort of what your solutions might be, I thought it'd be good to start with sort of what things do you feel are going really well in the garden?
Oh, I love that question. Tomatoes are going well.
Yeah.
Tomatoes seem to love it in the little garden. I've got about 4 varieties, I think, out there at the moment. One of which I'm super proud of myself because it was an experiment, but maybe you saw on the Instagram.
Yes,
I saved some seeds from some really delicious tomatoes I got from the supermarket, and they seem to be doing really,
great.
really
Have
well.
they ripened yet? Have you tasted
Not
them?
yet.
Okay, great.
Not yet.
Yeah.
So they could taste horrible. I will report back and I'll be very honest about it, but they look amazing.
Yeah, great.
What's going well? Did you see the little palette gardens that I've got?
Yeah.
Yes, I like the way that I've got that on the kind of paved bit on the kind of side return of the house, so that because that actually just get quite a bit of sunlight towards the afternoon. So I've got my herbs going on there. I've got a big. Oh no, I'm veering into what's going wrong. Okay, now I need to stay positive. What's going right? My fruit corner, raspberry and rhubarb are going very well. I think I've got my compost situations going very well because I've got 2 now.
Great.
So I filled one up and I'm ignoring it whilst I fill the other one up, which
perfect.
I'm feeling really proud of myself for. And then what's not going so
that was the next question. What's not going so well?
Thankfully, the honeysuckles opened up, so I've got more things for pollinators now. But for a long time, there wasn't anything for the bees or other pollinators to come in with. So maybe I'd like your advice on what I can do sooner in the season so that there's stuff for them to enjoy longer. What else is not going right? Okay, snails. My biggest issue is snails.
Okay.
They are just very abundant. They come out as soon as there's the smallest amount of precipitation. It's like an army of snails. And the first year we're here, I went to war on them and I was just getting rid of them. But it made me feel really uncomfortable getting rid of them because it's one of my son's favourite creatures. Right. So then the next year I was like, well, maybe I'll just grow things that they don't like. Yeah. But the truth is some of the things that I really, really love, like kale, and that's one of the few vegetables that we'll all eat, they love it.
Yes.
So it's like snails again, and now caterpillars have just gone wild on it, and all my kale is now looking like lace, and it's really heartbreaking. Yeah. So that's not going well, snails.
Right.
So I don't know whether or not, is it worth going to war on them? Is it just to kind of figuring out how we can live in unison?
Well, I think it's always a difficult thing. So I go and do talks and consultations and everything. And the thing that always comes up in every garden and at every garden talk is slugs and snails. And, because they are the thing that is probably most destructive in the garden, that's the one thing you sow your little lettuce seeds and you're getting all excited because they're just coming up, and you come the next day and there's not a single one left, it's just been eating.
It's so demoralising.
And it is really demoralising. So I suppose that my approach, I will put out slug traps. So I found a design of slug trap, and this is true for snails as well. I know that the traditional beer traps are not great because ground creatures will fall into them, things like ground beetles, which will actually eat slugs' eggs and things like that. You don't want to kill off those. But is to get a plastic bottle, like ideally a plastic milk bottle or a water bottle, and you cut a little strip, like an inch strip out, almost like a little window, about maybe 5 centimetres off the base, upwards from the base of the bottle.
Right.
And then you fill that with beer. You'd be amazed, but the slugs will actually be attracted to the beer. But unlike little beetles and things, they will actually climb up the side of the plastic bottle and through the little window and into the beer, and then drown. And also because you leave the top on the bottle, it means, unlike a little dish of beer, it will stop the water. If it rains or whatever, it will stop so much rain getting in and diluting the beer and washing it all out. So I will put those in place a couple of weeks before I'm going to start planting, so that will reduce the numbers before the point where I'm wanting to plant out my vulnerable plants.
Right. I don't know if you saw in the video that I sent you, I've got kind of like the people who lived here before, they made a kind of bench situation out of pallets at the back. I removed one of them so I had more growing space, but I kept one of them. But a lot of snails live under there. Should I get that out?
So I think if you recognise, I mean, a lot of people actually now on allotments are realising that if you put a plank as a raised bed edge, that is where all the slugs and snails will hide, is that just against the wood. So now in my own garden, I'm just sort of mounding beds rather than them having edges. I'm just having them as a sort of mounds because that is the place where the slugs and snails will congregate. So yeah, if you have somewhere in your garden, something that you know is a place where they will hide, then if it's something that you can remove, then I would take it away. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, permission to do that, thank you.
So putting in the beer traps a bit before, you're wanting to plant crops will really help. And then once...
Okay, could you send me a picture, please, of what that design looks like? That would be brilliant. And then I can put that in the show notes as well so everyone else can get their DIY traps on the go.
And then once I've actually put things in, I will go out at kind of dusk, so just as it's starting to go dark, and I will go out with a pair of scissors and chop them in half. And it might sound really gruesome, but the way I see it is I need to eat. And if I didn't do any slug control whatsoever, then I wouldn't really have any annual crops at all. So I know that some people like to relocate them somewhere else, and if you're so inclined, gather them all up, but you'd have to drive a long way, not just chuck them over into the neighbour's garden because they will just come back.
Does that not work?
No, they will travel a surprising distance. So
really?
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, chucking them over the wall. And I think they've done some research to show that, they sort of have territories and things. So they will actually, a bit like homing pigeons, they will come back to your garden. So,
okay.
Yeah. So if you really can't bear to kill them, take them out to the countryside somewhere.
Okay. There's a park at the end of our street, actually. I'm just waiting for my kids to be a little bit older, and I was going to pay them to collect as many snails as possible and go and put them in the park.
Put them in the park, yeah. So I know that sometimes in sustainable gardening, people say, oh, well, if you grow in a certain way, you'll get to a point where there's this lovely equilibrium where nature manages the snail and slug population. But I have very rarely experienced that when growing annual crops.
Right, okay.
It's a bit different if you're growing perennial vegetables. So one of my suggestions was going to be to look at some perennial vegetables maybe to put in.
I'm very interested in that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So instead of sowing something every year, it growing for the year, then you're harvesting it, you have crops that are there all the time growing in the ground. So you can get perennial kale. I don't know if you've heard of perennial kale.
They're two lovely words.
Yeah, so there's different varieties. I grow one that's called Taunton Dean, but that gets really quite big, so that might not be the best one for your garden.
Okay. I mean, I love kale, so I'm prepared to make a space for that.
Okay, yeah. And it's very pretty as well, that one. It's got sort of purple midribs. So I'm very much for my edible spaces looking really beautiful as well.
Absolutely.
So I really like the fact that it's got these purple midribs. And there's another one called Dorbenton's kale. And you can even get a variegated form called panache as well. So perennial kale, I absolutely love. And I have found, it still does get a bit attacked by caterpillars. And a bit the same, really. I will go out regularly and I will check the leaves on my kales. And if I see any of the little eggs on the underside of the leaves, I'll just rub them off. And if there's tons of caterpillars because I wasn't really paying attention, then I will go and squash them as well and put them on the compost heap. But whatever you decide to do with your caterpillars, you can take them. But I've found that perennial kales seem to be a little bit able to cope with the attacks a little bit better because a lot of the perennial plants are a bit more robust. So unlike small kales that you've grown from seed, they can get attacked while they're still quite young and be completely obliterated.
Yeah.
I have a few perennial kales that I just actually let the caterpillars eat them through the summer because they spring back and then I just pick leaves through the winter once they've recovered from caterpillar attacks. So, you can, but in a smaller space, you might not want to share all of your summer kale crop with the caterpillars. So that's up to you. But there's loads of perennial vegetables. There's one called Babington leek, a perennial leek.
Oh.
So you pick that really early in the year. So you were talking about trying to sort of extend the season in which you can pick things. So Babington leeks will come up from the ground really early in the year, sort of, January, February time. And you cut them at ground level. So it's a bit like cut and come again. So you can cut those and pick them, and then you get to a certain time in the year, you can cut them for a couple of months, and then you just leave them for the rest of the year to sort of grow and recover. And then the following winter, you can be cutting them again. So
brilliant.
A bit like you would with something like asparagus. You have like a season where you cut it and then you just let it, you let it grow and recover.
Yeah. Do you need a lot of space for asparagus?
I don't think you need a lot of space, but I think it's arguable whether if you have a small space, would you get much of a crop from the amount of space?
I was thinking that's something we eat.
Yeah, well, you can certainly grow it in a small space, and it will grow. It sort of takes up more vertical space, so you could definitely grow it, and it's quite attractive when the ferny fronds come out.
Yeah. Okay, I'll think about that.
Yeah, but it's just you don't get that much from it. So something like, you're growing a tomato, you can get quite a lot of tomatoes from a quite small space.
Sure,
Whereas with asparagus, if you're growing just a small patch of it, if you're going to get 10 spears of asparagus, is that going to be worth taking up that space? Point. So that's something to think about as well when you're choosing what you're going to grow.
I just thought of a question. I have one side of the garden where the wall is that doesn't see very much direct light at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there something edible I can grow in that bit? It's just got like slate chippings on the moment, but I can clear that out. What can...
Yeah, so there are things that will grow. There's a climbing plant called Caucasian spinach. Its Latin name is Hablitzia tamnoides. And that actually likes the shade. So if you have a shady wall, you could grow that along that wall, and it would be much happier there than it would.
Would it literally grow up?
You have to put, some kind of wires or trellis or something on the wall.
I have a trellis. At the moment, it's got a jasmine plant that wants to take over the world up it, but I could make some space.
Yes, yeah. So if you've got somewhere that's a bit shadier, then that would be a really great plant to grow. And so you eat the leaves. Usually the younger leaves. So with a lot of perennial plants, you can eat the younger leaves, and they taste nice, and then you sort of let it grow for the rest of the year. So you could grow something like that. Yeah. Yeah, and there's actually lots of other vegetables that quite like the shade as well. So some of the salad crops don't actually like to be in a hot, sunny spot. So things like lettuce actually prefer a bit of shade. And even Swiss chard will grow without much sunlight as well.
Oh, okay.
It would be definitely worth looking up, just look it up online, and there's, endless lists of vegetables that like the shade. But yeah, it's not to think that you can only grow things in sunny areas. There's plenty of things that grow in shade.
Because that's a bit of a wasted space at the moment that I could use. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about plants for pollinators as well. So I include a lot of bulbs in my planting designs.
Right,
bulbs are really great because they will sort of come up, flower, and then disappear again before anything else grows. So they're not taking up that space. You're not sort of sacrificing growing space because they're over and done before anything comes up.
Do you leave your bulbs in, or do you take them out and dry them out and put them back in?
No,
I
leave them in. So things like crocus, they come out really early in the year. There's something called winter aconite, and they'll be flowering even like whilst they're, the ground is frosty and they're covered in snow. They keep flowering. I tend to use dwarf daffodils. I love daffodils, but they can get really big and they can just start to swamp other things out.
They kind of look a bit
really
silly unless you've got loads as well, don't they? You've just got a few like.
Yeah, and they can start to look quite messy as well, just as your other plants are coming up. And so I actually prefer to use the dwarf ones because they look much nicer as they're dying, and other plants will come up and cover them up much quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like the little tete-a-tetes. I love those. They're so sweet.
Yeah, so that means you've got plants for pollinators, really early in the year when there's not necessarily much else flowering. And then through the summer, you can have things like that are also edible. So you can have flowers that you can also eat yourself in salads and things like that. And that way you're sort of giving your plants a multifunctional use. So you're not feeling like you're sacrificing your growing space just for the pollinators, because you can eat those flowers as well. So things like daylilies. So not actual lilies because they're poisonous.
Not those.
Not those.
No, we don't have any lilies actually because we've got a cat and I've heard that they're very bad for cats. So
Yeah, well, as far as I know, daylilies are fine for everyone. In fact, for us humans, you can eat every single part of the plant. So
wow.
Their Latin name, to avoid confusion, is hemerocallis.
Okay.
And so you can eat the roots, the shoots, the leaves, the flowers, and you can use the flower buds in stir fries and things like that.
Oh my goodness.
So I really like to, as I'm just gardening and weeding, I like to just pick off a petal and have a munch on those.
Oh,
so
my daughter would love that. She loves eating things that are literally growing.
Yes, yeah. So that's really nice. And there's certain varieties that taste nicer than others. So I'll try and send you a list of the varieties.
Oh, please do. Amazing.
And let me think what else. So campanulas as well. I don't know if you know campanulas.
I don't know those, no.
There's a lovely one called the Siberian bellflower. And that one actually has, it sort of creeps along the ground. So it's quite good to have on the edge and it just sort of fills in gaps between everything else. It grows in, rocky walls and things like that where there's not much soil.
Yeah.
And you can eat the leaves and the
Are
flowers.
they the ones
on
that are purple?
Yeah, so purple.
I think
yeah.
I've got some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can eat the flowers of all campanulas, but that one is really nice, and the flowers are quite sweet. But you can eat the leaves as well, mainly earlier in the year because in the summer they can get a bit tougher. In the softer growth in the spring is quite nice, but they're evergreen, so you could technically add a little bit to your salads through the winter as well. So that's quite nice in terms of just having a little bit of something. And in that respect, actually, just having lots of herbs. So over time, my salads have gone from being mostly lettuce to actually being mostly herbs now and things like that. So I also put in, there's a lovely allium that's a bulb called allium molly, and that's really drought resistant as well. But the flowers are so sweet. So a bit similar really to flowers of wild garlic, but a bit sweeter. So when I'm picking my salads now, it's like, I'll have some oregano leaves and some thyme leaves and a few flowers from the alliums, so.
Oh, that looks beautiful.
Yeah, it looks beautiful and it tastes really nice as well. So I think it's just great to have things that look lovely, but you can eat them as well. I quite like that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. So, when I was out putting my laundry out today, I was picking a few weeds, and then that triggered a memory of what I wanted to ask you. I think that we tend to have, as a society, quite a kind of certain idea of what like a well-kept, tidy garden looks like, don't we? And it's all the weeds are out and there's some bare soil between all our plants. But I know that bare soil isn't good because that can wash away nutrients much easier. And if you've been making compost and things like that, you don't want that to happen, especially if you're not using artificial like fertilizers and stuff. So like, when do you get rid of weeds? When is it a good idea to keep them? At what point do they start to kind of take away nutrients and water from the things you actually want to grow? Is it a good idea to kind of prevent them by putting down like some living mulch or some other kind of mulch? Like, are we wanting no bare soil at all? Is a bit okay? Like, what am I doing here? What's my goal?
Yeah, so the ideal would be to have no bare soil at all.
Okay.
So I always mulch every year. I will put a layer of mulch down. And usually that is at the end of the year when I've cut everything back, but before the bulbs start coming up. So it's usually around sort of November, December time that I'll do that. And so that could be, it could be well-rotted compost, your homemade compost. It could be, if you don't have your own compost, it could be sort of well-rotted manure you've bought in from elsewhere. It could be leaves that you've rotted down. It's just something organic that covers the soil, and that way it stops the weed seeds germinating in the first place.
So with the compost, are we digging it in a bit? We're literally just planting it on top? No,
you're just literally putting it on top. So maybe, 4 or 5 centimetre layer, I mean,
that's optimistic.
Yes.
With what I've got.
Well, exactly. And really, if you only manage a 2 centimetre layer, that's also fine. It's just really to exclude the light and to stop anything germinating, but also to keep the water in. So wherever you've got bare soil, water is going to be evaporating quicker from that. So it keeps the moisture levels in as well. And it will be adding nutrients, so it's probably not as relevant in your garden because it's not that you're going to be double digging it. But I always say follow no dig. So for anyone who's starting a new allotment or a new garden, research no dig. There's a fantastic no dig gardener called Steph Hafferty, and she's got a YouTube channel. She's written books. She's been doing it for many years, and I just love the way that she gardens. So if anyone's starting out and you think that you have to start out by digging your entire allotment plot, then before you do that, learn about no dig.
Yeah, before you break your back.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you were talking about, pollinators, and actually one of the things that we forget as well is that pollinators complete their life cycles in different ways. So if you can incorporate a bit of water into the garden, then, certain insects will lay their eggs in water or on the edge of water. And also, pollinators need to drink. So in this really dry spell that we've had, I mean, here it didn't rain for 6 weeks solid. And I remember going round to my mum's house. They've got lots of beehives nearby. And she just has a small bird bath, and it was just swarming all day long with honeybees coming to drink from it, because there was just no other water around. There was nothing. So, don't underestimate the importance of somewhere for pollinators to drink. And that includes, really, if you can, something that's got shallow edges, because, they need somewhere to sort of sit and drink. If you have just a pond with straight sides, quite often they will drown.
Okay.
So even if it's just a small shallow bowl with some pebbles in and some water in so they can land on the pebbles and drink, don't underestimate the value of that to pollinators in the dry weather.
That is a project for after school today.
Absolutely, yeah. So that is, water is really important for pollinators just as much as plants. And also some things like some hoverflies need like rotting wood
right,
and decomposing wood in order to complete their life cycle. So I always try and have like an untidy corner. So if you're a kind of tidy gardener, then try and locate it behind a shrub or something like that where you can't see it. But actually, it's really important to leave something that's rotting down for different creatures who live in that kind of habitat.
Right.
So,
okay, cool. I can do that.
Yeah. So small log piles, small stone piles, a dish of water, all those kind of elements as well. Try and work those into the garden.
Okay, I will do. Okay, I can do that. Cool.
Right. And so let me have a look. And also, I saw you have some great pallet planters, which are lovely. There's also another way of using pallet planters. I don't know if you've seen the ones where they actually fill them with compost. Have you seen those?
Are they flat? Are they
No, they're
vertical?
upright. Yeah, so they're vertical, but instead of sort of filling just a few little bits, you put a back on them and sides on them, and you fill the whole thing with compost, and then you cut little holes in the plastic and you plant into them. So what you've got, instead of having, because I don't know if you find this, but whenever you've got small pots or small containers, they need a lot of watering because they're constantly drying out.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can get something that has a lot of compost in, you can actually grow much more in that space. And I've done a few designs where I've put actually 2 pallets back to back. So I've taken off the wood from one side, the planks from one side, on 2 planters, and I stick them together. So you've immediately got double the depth. And I'll send you a photo of this, but I've got double the depth. And if you have somewhere that you don't have to put it against a wall, it means you can plant both sides up as well. But even if you're just planting the front up and the top up, it immediately gives you, the entire space of the pallet in which to have plants coming down. So a bit like a green wall design.
Yeah, I love that.
And
okay, cool.
that works really well. So you can plant in lettuce or strawberries or herbs into that, and they will sort of grow out of the front, and then you can pick them. And that also helps with slug control sometimes because they're a bit off the ground. So it's a bit further for the slugs to go to find them, which helps as well.
Brilliant. Oh, these are great ideas. Thank you.
Even though you've already got the pallet planters there, which are great, I think you could fit actually even more growing space.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think you could.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Wow, you've given me a lot to think about there.
Yeah. So are there any other questions that, that I haven't answered while we're here?
I went down a bit of a rabbit hole the other day, and I was researching whether or not to buy some comfrey plants.
Oh, right, yes.
Because I was reading that they're like the best for, well, not necessarily the best, but they're very good for providing nutrients to the soil.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was Hugh Richards that told me.
Yeah. He's fantastic. So so you can grow comfrey and you can make brilliant liquid feed. And if you plant them next to your compost bin, then all the nutrients that might leach out of your compost bin into the ground, then the comfrey plants can make use of those. But they do grow very big. Like they can be quite invasive. Okay. So I think, if you want to grow comfrey and that's what you've decided to do, that's absolutely fine. And you can do that.
I'm wondering if I could do that on the side where, in between my compost bins, where it's more in the shade.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be fine in the shade. And so you just cut them a few times a year, make your plant feed. And because you've not got a massive space, that probably would be enough feed for the whole garden.
Brilliant.
So you can include it, but just be aware that they do get quite big.
He wants to take over the world. Okay.
Yeah, so I think if you can plant them, like you say, in between two compost bins, they're not going to then spread out and take over the whole garden. So.
Okay, that's really cool. Brilliant. Okay, quickly about compost, because I love making compost because it seems like, well, it's free.
Yes, yeah.
If people are a bit on the fence, excuse the pun, about making compost, like maybe is it worth it? Like, do you think that even if you have like a balcony, or is it worth it then?
I personally do think it's worth it, but I know that if you have a small space, it does take up quite a bit of space and it's there for a long time. And just like you said, really ideally you need two compost bins, because you need one to be composting and one to be being filled up. So it does take quite a bit of space. So if you decide that you don't want to take up that much space, then there's nothing wrong with sending your green waste for the council to take away in your brown bin, and then they're composting it there, and then you have to buy it back, so in a way you're outsourcing your composting. But I think it is really a valuable thing to make your own compost. And when you've got your own compost at home and it's full of worms and all sorts of other soil life, it's so much better for your soil than these bags you buy in the garden centre where it's kind of sterile and quite often these days not even properly composted. So I've used compost before, which killed my plants. So
really?
So I would always prefer to make my own. But if you just struggle with that, and some people just really don't like having that sort of rotting vegetation in their garden, then there's nothing wrong with sending it away. But I would say just don't put it in landfill. That would be my main thing. If you don't want to make your own compost, can you find a friend or neighbour who would like to accept your green waste? Just don't put it in landfill is my main thing.
Yeah. And why are we not putting it in landfill?
So it creates, methane and things like that as it rots down, and they're really bad gases for the environment. So I think I was listening to something a while ago, and they said that sometimes we throw things away because we think, oh, well, I'm not going to eat them anyway, so it's fine to put them in the bin. But actually, it's more destructive to put them in the bin to compost them. If you're composting it, then those nutrients and the carbon within them, it's getting recycled and used to grow more things. If it goes into landfill, it's actually creating a lot of pollution. So,
right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you.
Great.
I love that consultation. Thank you so much. I feel very inspired now.
Oh, great. And I always say to everyone, whenever I do one, if you suddenly think of a question, in a day's time or a week's time, or whatever, just email. It's fine. It's not like this is the end of our conversation. I'm done.
Oh, brilliant.
There's always follow, if you have other things that you've forgotten, or even just things where you think, oh, I can't really remember what she said, then just get back to me. That's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. Well, I'll ask you your contact details at the end so we can include that. Brilliant. So let's get into making and sewing as well. So what is your relationship with clothing? Like, how do you choose to clothe yourself and your family?
Well, I've always been really aware of waste. Even from quite a young age, I didn't like to buy things new. So as a teenager, I would pretty much always shop at charity shops. And so I've always done that really over time. But it's always really hard to find things that are in your size. So you see something you like and it doesn't fit. So over time, I've really enjoyed learning actually how to alter things. so that they fit properly. I just have a shape that I just never find trousers that fit. So my challenge at the moment is trying to make myself some trousers, because I've never done that before. So that's like my new challenge, how to fit trousers. I've always done that. And I used to, when I was younger, my gran was a textiles artist.
Oh.
So she did mainly machine embroidery and things like that. But so from quite a young age, she would have us making toys and machine embroidery pictures. And so even though she didn't make clothes, I knew how to use a sewing machine from quite a young age. And then as she upgraded her sewing machine, I would get her old one. So all the way through university, I had my sewing machine with me. And I had this dream when I had the kids that I would make all of their own clothes. And then, of course, you have kids and realize there's no time to make any clothes. So, so I did knit them a couple of things when they were little, which was lovely. But as they got older, I just didn't have time to knit bigger garments. So that was it,
Yeah, especially knitting.
And it was actually my husband that taught me to knit.
Awesome.
Yeah, his gran had taught him to knit. So as a family, we like making things. So I have made things, but I think over the last maybe decade or so, I started to understand how unsustainable buying new fabric is. I know you've covered that a lot in all of your podcasts, and that is really great. And I've absolutely loved sort of learning more about that, really. So I tend to make things out of old clothes or bed sheets, or like people just know now that if they're getting rid of curtains or bed sheets, they send them my way. I love vintage clothes, so that's kind of my style.
Right.
So I love buying old vintage tablecloths that have, past their best. They've got tears or stains, and then I'll take the nice bits and try and create them into something nice.
Fantastic. So it's a mixture of secondhand, altered, made new, but usually from reclaimed textiles in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really suits the style that I like to wear anyway. And so, I think because I've always had a particular style that in general shops don't have what I like in anyway. I just don't go clothes shopping anymore. I don't, other than to take the kids to get new clothes for school or something. We actually mostly go to clothes swaps when we.
Do you?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky. We have one in our village that someone set up. So every few months we'll take things that we don't want, and other people will bring me things to take with me. So we'll go down. We'll swap some clothes, and then we've got a whole new wardrobe. So
I love that. I love that community aspect as well of that.
Yeah, and wherever we go on holiday, the first thing we do as a family is find out where the charity shops are. So that's what we really love to do.
I could get my family on board with that as well, because that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my husband is very much into that as well, and the kids as well.
What does he look for when he's in the charity shop?
Oh, he loves cooking, so he's always looking for cooking related things, baking. He likes things like that, and obviously gardening. We're both gardeners, so we look for things like that, and books. We like to have a lot of books, so he looks for that kind of thing. And he buys all his clothes as well. I'm not good at making shirts. I've just made my own first blouse recently. I've just got to put the buttons on, so I've left that bit till last. I'm just trying to find some nice buttons to put on it. So he buys all his, buys his own shirts from charity shops. And the kids very quickly learn actually that if we go somewhere, the toy shop, the £10 holiday money does not stretch very far. Whereas we go in a charity shop and they come out with bags full of stuff. So
absolutely.
They're completely sold on charity shops, yeah.
Yeah, completely. Your pocket money goes a lot further in a charity shop, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
You can have the conversation about, all this plastic. And I think you can also, I feel like, it's easier for the kids to kind of then have a bit more of a rotation of stuff. And it's like, we could take that to the charity shop and then another child could enjoy it. And you've got a bit more of it rather than just a sea of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And now my youngest goes to an art club just in the town that we live in. And I love their sort of ethos. They just have loads of junk modelling stuff as well as new things. And I got chatting to the person that runs that, and I was explaining about how I love to make clothes and how I wish that actually as an adult I could come to an amazing art club like this. And she said to myself and my friend, well, if you want to come down and use this space, just let me know. So now we go every Thursday night. There's a group of us who met at the children's centre. So we're all mums, and because now the kids are older, we don't sort of all meet up. You know, when the kids are little, you meet up all the time for play dates and things like that. So now we meet up every Thursday and we all, you know, do something different creatively. So someone might do scrapbooking, or someone might come and mend something. I like to use that time for sewing. So and as part of that, the woman who runs the place said we can actually set up our own sustainable sewing area, so we can start to run like clothes swaps from there, and also mending workshops and upcycling clothes sessions.
Oh, wow.
So I'm really excited about that. And because my daughter is getting more and more interested in making her own clothes, I suggested...
How old is she?
She's 12. But we did a lot of sewing in lockdown. That was we ignored all the Zoom lessons, to be honest, and we just did our own thing.
Let's make a bag.
Yeah, we did lots of sewing. And so I suggested to her that once we've got this sewing area set up and maybe got a few more people to come along, that we could use the space to put on a little eco fashion show as well, so that it gives like a goal to work towards to make some
Absolutely.
Clothes, so.
Oh, how wonderful. I'm very excited. Can you keep me updated with how this goes? And then when it's set up, let me know, and then I can mention it on the podcast in case there's anybody near you that didn't see your flyer or something.
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, good luck with that. That's really exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Well, thank you so much, Pippa. So where can people find you?
So I post a lot on Instagram. I really enjoy when I'm gardening, you know, I think, I wish people could see that. So I'll take lots of photographs. So I tend to post on an almost daily basis. And I do some bits on Facebook, and also I have a YouTube channel called Those Plant People as well.
And is it the same name on Instagram and Facebook as well as your YouTube?
No, it's confusing. If only I had thought to do that.
Well, who thinks of that?
No. Well, also my business, Those Plant People, is jointly my husband, so we do that together. So on YouTube, it's Those Plant People. On Instagram, it's Pippa Chapman _ Those Plant People. And then on Facebook, I can never remember what my handle is, but I'm down as Pippa Chapman. So
awesome. And people can find you there if they're interested in your garden consultation.
Yeah. So I do have a website as well, just thoseplantpeople.com. So I have a website as well, but I tend to update that less than I do sort of, you know, if you want to see the kind of things that I do, you'd see more of that on Instagram or Facebook. But if you wanted details of consultations and things like that, then that would be on the website.
Perfect. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's been really fun.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!